Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Jackie Gallant. I'm the Director of Programs at MOTH, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of the NYU More-Than-Human Life program. For those of you who may not be familiar with MOTH, we are an interdisciplinary initiative advancing rights and well-being for humans, non-humans, and the web of life that sustains us all. You can learn more about MOTH at www.mothlife.org. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Robert Macfarlane. Yes, please, give it up. Yes, please. Writer and member of the Moth Collective, to discuss his brilliant new book, Is a River Alive?, which is a major contribution to the growing movement to recognize the rights of nature and transform relations with the more than human world. At the heart of this timely book is a single transformative idea, that rivers are not mere matter for human use, but living beings who should be recognized as such in both imagination and law. Rob is the author of books about people, place, and nature, including Underland, The Old Ways, Landmarks, and the Wild Places, as well as, with Jackie Morris, The Lost Words and the Lost Spells. He has written films including River and Mountain, both starring Willem Dafoe, and collaborated with musicians including Johnny Flynn, Cosmo, Sheldrake, and Julie Fowlis. His work has been translated into many languages and widely adapted for stage, film, television, music, and radio. He is a professor of literature and environmental humanities in Cambridge. Right? In conversation today with Rob is César Rodríguez-Garavito. César is a professor of law here at NYU Law. He is the chair of the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice and the founding director of the NYU More-Than-Human Life program. Before turning the mic over, a quick note on the Q&A. As you'll all see, there were note cards placed at your seat. If you have a question you would like to ask Rob, please write it on the note card. We'll come around throughout the discussion to collect the note cards and try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And with that, over to you, Rob and César.
Well, this is such a special occasion for all of us here at Moth, and for me personally to have Rob, in a way, close a loop in a spiral, because it all started for us in 2022 when, through our dear friend Merlin, we reached out to Rob and said, would you come to the first Moth gathering? We do a Moth gathering of creatives from around the world, artists, scholars, journalists, writers, scientists, and the very first one was the most experimental one. We had literally no idea what we were doing, but we knew that there was something to an idea whose time had come. That was the first line in the invitation to the participants in that gathering. I had read Underland, and The Lost Words had been very moving to me when I first read that book and followed the points in that book. So we reached out, and Rob says, well, it turns out that I'm working on this book. You already had, we went back to the email, and you already had the title for the book. And the idea that Rob was working on had a lot of affinities where we were going. And he said, but the thing is that he's a poet, a writer, so he put it more beautifully than we lawyers would ever have put it. He said, well, what I'm trying to investigate is whether a river is alive. That's a much better proposition or better question that does a forest have rights, which is something that in the end, Rob beautifully managed to weave into the story about life and aliveness in his book. Now, without going too deep into this story, because this is something that I want to ask Rob to tell us about as we discuss his fantastic book. By the way, an instant New York Times bestseller. So please give it up for that fantastic. And the thing is that, as I told the Moth team when I came back from Ecuador, from this first trip that we did with Juliana Porci and Cosmo Sheldrake back in 2022. Became fast friends in, what was that, October 2022?
Yeah.
So a few months after that first moth gathering. I came back from Ecuador and told the team, like, this book is going to be a bestseller. And it doesn't have, you don't have to be a psychic to know that something that Rob writes and on that topic had a good chance of resonating very deeply. But one of the reasons why I thought it was going to be a best-selling book is because literally as we were hiking up the forest, you know, whole paragraphs would come out of his mouth like perfectly formed. And it's like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. If we were dictating into one of those AI apps, we would have probably had a really strong first draft by the time we had made it to the lower camp. So with that, Rob, I wanted to ask you to get us started by asking you about the process of writing the book and about the structure of the book. If you could walk us through it, because not everyone has had a chance to read it, but everyone will hopefully be reading it very soon if you haven't. So please, Rob, could you get us started with that?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, New York City, for making me so warmly welcome on my second, third day in the US, and warm greetings to everyone watching from around the world, including, hi, Mum and Dad. So, and then this is such a special evening for me. It's a closing of a loop. It is no exaggeration to say this book would not exist without César, Rodríguez-Garavito, without the MOTH program that has become the collective of which I've been fortunate to become part, and which has mycelially branched out and connected me to astonishing people and places and ideas. I nearly became a lawyer 3 times. It's not like the temptation in the wilderness, but it was the wrong turning I nearly took. I would have been a very bad solicitor in a suburb of London. But working with César, his colleagues Jackie and others, I have come to understand that lawyers are some of the most amazing people on the planet. When they think right and work right, they're absolutely incredible. They have slate-cleaving intelligence and an enormous courage and huge compassion. So thank you so much. And also, I should say, in case it's opaque to you, César is a central figure in the first third of the book. So this is a novel experience for me, being interviewed by one of my characters. And at some point, I want to ask César what it feels like to be written about. And by me, there's a small union of people who are now characters in Robert Macfarlane books. So this book took about 4.5 years. I think I made the first jottings about 5 years ago. And that took the form of 3 questions. Can a forest think? Does a mountain remember? And is a river alive? And all of those press at the limits of our language, and the hour here is a particularized hour. It's a Western, as it were, technocratized, rationalized hour. Can we speak of agency, of intent, of will, even of consciousness, of rights? Where does our language begin to fail and break up into a shatter belt? And that is always an interesting place, because it is where a regime of perception, a cognitive empire, let's say, meets the surplus, meets that which cannot be represented. And so in many ways, this was the hardest book I've ever written, but it was also the most thrilling and invigorating, and still is. It continues to pour through my life. We're still deeply involved in Los Cedros, the forest in Ecuador, where we met effectively. And but I did realize that the upstream question, the spring source question, was not should a river have rights. It was is a river alive, and that became the kind of portal, really, the seemingly small gap you creep through, and then you find yourself in an immense and teeming forest of ideas and people and places.
One of when I made peace with Rob's uncanny talent for words was when I saw I had the privilege of reading the successive manuscripts, and I saw that he really had to work really hard on the manuscript, despite my initial understanding of his work process. And one of the things that you did was precisely like swim upstream from the law to life, to
Yes.
aliveness.
Yes.
I kind of reluctantly saw how the legal, he had a really long, you had a really long section in each of the chapters, especially in chapter 1, about the law, about the legal history of the rights of nature movement in Ecuador and elsewhere, because in addition to being an author and a poet, Rob is a scholar, and I realized that you had kind of grasped the essence of the law, not only as a tool of social change, but as a tool of storytelling, a storytelling tool. So could you say a bit more about how you grappled with those two layers of your book, the aliveness and the legal aspect of the story?
Yes, yes. So there's many of you, most of you who have no acquaintance with the book. It has 4 main landscapes, 4 main rivers. The first of those is the river Who, flows through my landscape and my life, which rises from a small spring a mile from my home on the chalk, the 99-million-year-old chalk of South Cambridge. And then the book takes 3 major fieldwork journeys, as it were, into ideas, into place, into river, into people. The first of those is Ecuador, Los Cedros, the cloud forest that was saved in 2021 by this powerful constitutional court ruling that compelled the eviction of the 2 mining companies who were bent on the rivers, on the forest's destruction. The second is Chennai, Tamil Nadu, southeast India, where I work and travel closely with a small group of activists led by a remarkable young man called Yuvan Aves, the best all-round field naturalist I've ever walked and worked with. And the third is Nitassinan, the Innu homeland, which we might know better, you might know better as Quebec, northeastern Quebec. And there a wild river called the Muteshikau-Shipu, or the Magpie, flows vastly and powerfully south through the boreal forest to make landfall on the north coast of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And I will just end that kind of sketch map of these years, just so we can locate ourselves, by saying that in each of these terrains or territories, rivers are dramatically under threat of death by mining in Ecuador, by pollution in Chennai, and by damming, death by drowning, we could say, in Nitassinan. In each of them, a hugely complex river politics has been activated by this threat of death. In each of them also, rivers and life, more broadly, are being radically reimagined. So it was that combination of profound threat and radical river imagination that drew me to each of these places. So then how the law slides over, beneath, and interweaves with the life. So César, bless him, among his many kindnesses to me over these years as friend and inspiration, has been reading the first draft of this book, which was 164,000 words long. And I think I had to write everything down to wrap my arms around the immensity of the concepts and the people and the places. The finished book is about 99,000 words long. So I basically subtracted a book from a book and made a book, which is not a maths I ever want to try and do again, because it was extremely painful. But César read both long and short drafts and was brilliant, incisive. But, well, the law is, let us, we could say many things about it. One thing I've learned from you is that it is a storied thing and it can be restoried. You have helped me understand that precedent is not monolithic. It is not impervious to retellings. And also that law is at some level perhaps the ligament in the sense of controlling the respective motions between imagination and the exercise of power as it manifests in life. So something like this. So I think it's impossible to write in a way out with law, because it mediates that relationship between imagination and action so consequentially, but especially when one is dealing with life, with rights as this fascinating manifestation of that interface of imagination and power. So César was useful in helping me understand the law, and then also I think you said, could you just put a bit more law back in, please?
Yeah, I did say that. I said that. It's a lot of work. I told him it's hard work. Put some of that back into the story. But
Yeah.
by the way, I never said what Rob said in those terms. Those are his terms. I would have never been able to put that idea in such compelling and eloquent terms. I love the part when you said that part of restoring is very powerful. Um, and the one thing that I regret you cut out from that reservoir. You called the original manuscript a reservoir,
Yeah.
and then this is the river,
This
right?
is the river.
This
yeah,
is the river.
exactly.
But you called me a badass in the first, which I
Did I
love.
take that out?
You took that out, and I still regret it.
He's a badass,
I
everyone.
still regret it. I still regret it. But
He really is.
one thing that you did say beautifully, and I'm going to quote from a recent review from by Elizabeth Rush in The Atlantic. Wrote really a beautiful piece about your book from Bogota, Colombia, of all places.
Which
and
immediately predisposed you to
true,
this.
very positively, of course. So she writes, quote, as I read Is a River Alive, I found myself underlining sentence after sentence as verbs animated the world. Quote, leaves not in the rain. Quote, mist hangs in scarves. Quote, the light of the rising sun sets the world ringing like a singing bowl. End quote. Macfarlane's prose offers a glorious invitation to return to one's child mind and its inherent wonder. Could you say more about the use of verbs as a way to communicate the power of the more than human world and how you use them in your own prose in this book?
Well, I should say I don't read my reviews. That's the longest bit of any review of this book that I have any consciousness of. So, but thanks for picking a nice bit, César. It's not that I hold other people's opinions in. It's just while I'm living in the intensity of publication, I need to kind of live in a cloud of unknowing as well. So I'll go and read them at some point. And anyway, but it's a beautiful one. And I think a lot about verbs. Sometimes you can make a sentence more active by subtracting them. And actually there are many, many, many verbless sentences in there. And that has a different kind of dynamism. It's like as I think Ezra Pound called it, phanopia, so the flashing of images up on the kind of screen of the skull. Mm. So when you take verbs away, then you end up with this sort of lapidary projection work, which interests me very much. But really I mean, early on I say, in English, there is no verb to river. But what could be more of a verb than a river? And I remember sort of realizing that and sort of hitting the head of my own language, really, with the palm of my hand. It's like, well, how has this happened? And this is what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls the grammar of animacy, or we could say in this case, the grammar of inanimacy. And you heard me earlier rotate that pronoun which to become who, the river who rises. And even I had to catch myself again, even though I spent 4 years speaking of rivers who flow, as they do in French, la rivière qui coule, but still there it was, the grammar sticking through, the river, the spring which, no, the spring who rises. So and Kimmerer writes beautifully, many of you will know Braiding Sweetgrass, of course, such a foundational text. And I think she talks about how in Potawatomi, bay is a verb. Bay is a verb. And bay is such a sedentary unit of water, but still it's a verb. And so that sense of and here we move back to the ontological claim, which is that life is not unit, it is process. And so if one is to write life as process and not unit, then you have to make grammar come alive. And language I mean, of course, writers know this, all of us know it. Language is a staggering animating force. We've all read novels and fallen in love with characters or grieved for characters who never existed. They only live as ink and paper. How did language do that? It animates, it generates, it creates ex nihilo and seeps into our being, we enter into relation with it. So in a sense, I realized that to make the river come alive, to make the river be alive, I had to make the river come alive. And to make the shift from river as alive to river is alive, language for the reader had to do a lot of that work, as well as idea and encounter insofar as they're separable from language.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of river and movement, my sense, having had the privilege of speaking with you as you were writing the book and also working with you for the protection of Los Cedros and on other causes, writing on this, working on the Song of the Cedars and other actions and initiatives. My sense is that this book itself is moving like a river. It's a tributary of many movements and
Yes.
currents that are out there, and that this river is augmenting. It's feeding. In that way, it's a political book. It's a book that is it contributes to social movement as much as to natural motion. Can you speak to that?
Well, I hope so. And I mean, when one writes, all of us know this. You write not with a predictable and quantifiable outcome in mind. That's kitsch. You write in the knowledge of in the hope of possibility. Let's say, Rebecca Solnit writes brilliantly about this in Hope in the Dark. That you have to write into uncertainty. If you try to predict absolutely what, anyway. So, and the other thing I want, that's a lovely sense of it both being fed by and feeding many other currents. And I spent 4.5 years thinking about rivers, and the best definition of a river I can come up with is a gathering that seeks the sea. It's both wholly insufficient and maybe gets at something, which is that extraordinary tributary, foliate, arborescent form of the river. When we singularize river as channel, it's like saying that a tree is its trunk and not its roots and its leaves and its mycelium and all the community of life that it sustains and supports. And when we speak of river just as its main channel, we forget that a river is born of a watershed, and everyone lives in a watershed. Wherever you live in the world, however flat your landscape, you are in a watershed. And you are also all water bodies. We are all part of the water cycle. When we run, we are rivers. When we sit, we are ponds. And recognizing ourselves as flowed through and flowing on, recognizing the river as community, as collection, convergence, and eventually evanescence of current and flow from many sources seems to me a thrillingly exciting thing. And at some level, this book is about community. It's very rarely individuals or singularized entities who are making change or acting with consequence, whether that be for the good or the ill, the mining corporation or the activist. They are all convergences and collections of tributaries of idea, of people, of place. And I see, again, this is one of these things that you recognize after spending years on a book. You look back from the outwards boundary of the terrain you have crossed, and suddenly all these patterns start to declare themselves that you didn't recognize when you were moving through them because they were just distributed points on the map. And you look back and suddenly, and it all lights up. And one of those that lit up stupidly, because I should have seen it, of course, is river as community and community as process. And so that, I think, runs through the book. Yeah.
That, I think, is one of the most beautiful aspects of the book, and how you tell the stories of the 3 places or the 4 places, because you tell them through the eyes of many people and the lives of many people and the grief of many people.
Yeah.
So this is kind of it's a networked story. In each place, there are some main characters, but clearly they're part of a whole web of action and web of life. And for that to be captured in the 90,000 words that you were allowed to keep from that reservoir river is quite a feat. But it also means a lot for those of us doing collective work, because sometimes you read fantastic prose, beautiful writing, that is all about the author, and it's all about the person being in places and telling and showing his or her kind of literary prowess, while not necessarily uplifting the hard work that's been done. Say back in, let's go back to Los Cedros, people like José de Cú, José de Cueva, the people who were there for decades before we ever showed up. Exactly. And that, could you speak to that aspect of the stories?
Well, I love that Moth is a collective. I love being part of a collective. It's, I mean, this work, we should say this glorious backdrop is done, which I now notice my shirt almost perfectly replicates. So homage to Elena Landinez, who is the artist of Moth, who draws on many sources and creates these wonderful hybrid beings. So the ethos of the collective is one I find myself increasingly drawn to, but no landscape speaks with a single voice. nature is not mute, as Galeano put it in this wonderful piece of writing that we read together in Los Cedros, and which was very consequential, actually, in, it seems, in nudging Ecuador towards installing those rights of nature articles in the Constitution. So to write of any place, you have to write polyphonically. You have to write what Mikhail Bakhtin, the Soviet literary theorist, calls with heteroglossia, many-tonguedness. And so I mean, insofar as a book in which a kind of organizing set of eyes and ears is mine, I wanted to hear with as many other ears as I could, see through as many other eyes as I could, let as many voices, river and human and howler monkey, sing through these pages, because then you come, you know, even paraphrasingly close to the multiplicity and complexity of any place. And if you feel that some sense of justice has been done to the enormous sort of, again, the tributaries of labor and commitment and passion and people who have all worked to, just to give that one example, save the Los Cedros cloud forest, one of the places of highest species diversity, endemicity, abundance of life in the world, from deletion, from elimination, a forest that is probably self-regulated according to the dry refugia hypothesis throughout the Pleistocene. It didn't freeze, basically. It's so it could be a 1.5 million year old forest. Then that's great, because it is the collective work. So yeah, there's a lot of dialogue here and a lot of voices. And you spoke about me tumbling out paragraphs. I don't think I did, but I wrote down a lot of what César said. And, oh boy, does he speak well. So,
I doubt it, but I will show you a picture of how he does it. There he is. He always carries these tiny notebooks. I see that is there a river like with a tiny field notes notebook with this cover? Because I think it's going to sell out pretty quickly.
Yeah, Field Notes have done a special little 3-pack, because they're the ones I've used for years and years and years. They've done a much, but
they're all pocket size, right?
Tiny, like A6. Like their screens don't smash. That's what I always say, and they don't run out of battery. So that is us high in the cloud forest, in the tiny clearing at near the birthplace of the Rio Los Cedros, the river that runs through that. And that's Cosmo, this incredible field recordist and musician and composer. And we actually wrote a song in that clearing with César, with Cosmo, with Juliana Ferci, the mycologist at the heart of this chapter as well, and crucially with the cloud forest. And we have subsequently released this song, Song of the Cedars. You can hear it wherever you get your streaming services, under a Creative Commons license, fully free for anyone to use. But the key is that we are now using this song, in which the cloud forest is itself recognized as a moral author, a moral co-author of the song. We couldn't have written it without the forest. The forest's voices and music sing through it. Cognitively, creatively, it was absolutely a collaborator. We're now using this to try and crack open the deeply anthropocentric copyright regime's global regime in Ecuador. And maybe you take up the legal story of what we're doing at that point.
Yeah, right now the petition is before the Copyright Authority, or the Ecuadorian Copyright Authority. We predictably lost in the first instance. We appealed. Because it's hard. I'm going to tell the story of why the Copyright Authority denied the registration of the song, because it's an interesting argument. The predictable argument is that this administrative agency would say that only human beings can be authors of any created piece of work, right? So any piece of work, that IP only applies to human beings, basically, the anthropocentric understanding of IP, although we're only asking for the recognition of moral authorship. We're not asking for full copyright with economic benefits to the forest and so on. But then the second argument was that the piece was not original enough, which I think didn't quite please Cosmo and Rob, who are accomplished lyricists and musicians.
The forest was also
very which is contradictory, as I said to Asmo, because it's either because the Copyright Authority said, well, this is all just sons of nature. And our response in appeal is, yeah, this is why we want the forest to be a co-author.
Right.
So we're fighting that the appeal, but we'll ultimately take the case to the courts, all the way to the Constitutional Court, which is the court that first recognized the Los Cedros forest as a subject of rights. So we're going to ask the court to extract the logical and legal consequences of its 2021 ruling.
And just one
Yes.
footnote to that is I think they used the word that they'd said that because the forest was inanimate.
Inanimate, exactly.
Inanimate.
Inanimate.
A really
Exactly.
interesting word to turn up in their
Exactly.
ruling.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
it was not alive, but it was also creating the work to a sufficient degree that the work was not original.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And
We have things to work
yes,
with. There,
exactly,
so,
exactly.
yeah, thank you.
Speaking of inanimate, I wanted to, there's one. So here's the Rob. Hard at work.
Sunbathing, folks.
Yes.
Did I consent to have my photograph taken?
But I wanna come back to this moment and have Rob read from the book. What do you think he's doing there?
What am I doing? Yeah,
It seems like he's praying to some high power.
remember.
Well, you were setting up the moth screen and just attracted the moth. And one of the moths that landed on that backlit screen was this one.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, inspired the logo of
The
moth. And
the moth that looks back at you. I mean, it landed on my hand, clicked its windows open. I was thinking about reciprocity between environment and self, and forms of reciprocal subjectivity of being watched as well as watching. And then this thing landed and clicked open its wings, and there were two huge eyes staring at it. I was like, okay, the forest is making its presence very, very clear.
Yeah. So, Rob, I wonder if you could read from this passage about butterflies and moths and let us know why you chose one animal over the other.
Okay. Well, I should just say the book is dedicated to my wife of many years, Julia Lovell, and it is also in memory of a man called José de Cou, who died in last May, just over a year ago, and he was the dogged, limpet-like defender of Los Cedros cloud forest, and he was remarkable, cantankerous, very difficult. And when I first met him, my sort of English sense of smooth manners / propriety was quite affronted by how rudely I was met, and it took that didn't really stop. But I came to understand that cussedness was what you had to be if you moved in a tent to a mountaintop in a cloud forest, and you live there for the next 35 years, and you give up your life and your health to keep that forest alive. So being polite to me was very low down his list of priorities, reasonably. Anyway, de Cou lumbers out to bid us farewell. It's going to be real hard yards for you today, he says encouragingly. We're just heading up to the high camp. 6 hours, 8, maybe 10. Even if you make it, there's nothing up there. You know that, just a tiny clearing, not much bigger than 3 tents side by side. That's all, nothing else. There's the forest and the river, Jose, I say. That's why we're here, after all. He softens. I wish I could get up there with you. I don't think I'm going to be doing that again in this lifetime. Did you enjoy your moths last night, Robert? They were unforgettable. The world divides into moth people and butterfly people, says de Cou. I think I'm a moth person, I say. Yeah, well, the world splits along those lines. The Germans are all moth nuts. The French are all for butterflies. There was once a rude French lepidopterist here, and when I asked him if he wanted to use a moth light, he looked like I'd asked him to shit on the floor. Who can count up all the moths in a forest, says Cosmo. A mathematician. I think it's time to go, I say. De Cou shambles back into the shadows of the station. So yeah, I should say Cosmo denies that he told that joke, but I think it's a joke I'd be proud to have told. So I think he should live with that. But why am I a moth person? Oh, well, I mean, I think we know the barest fingernail of a fraction of the moth world. I think butterflies are better known. So I love life that lives in shadow. And I think I spent 8 years writing a book about darkness called Underland. So maybe I'm somewhat moth inclined for that reason as well. But also, I mean, I know, great butterflies out there as well. But if I had to choose, I'm a moth person.
We want to move on to the Q&A, but I'm going to ask a last question about something that we discussed briefly on a WhatsApp exchange, and that shows up at different junctures in the book.
Yes.
One of the emotions that this book really kind of taps is, or sensibilities, is wonder. Wonder. And when I've asked you on WhatsApp once, well, do you think that wonder has political potential? Can wonder turn into action? And you said, well, there are kind of intermediate steps from wonder to hope. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, my mum taught me many things, but I often say that she taught me wonder and triage. So make good lists and get things in the right order, and wake up and be astonished by the world every day. And those have stood me in good stead. But wonder itself is not enough. You know, we can't, certainly not the world we live in now, as it were, late Anthropocene or terminal stage capitalism, whatever we want to call this. Well, Gramsci gives it to us best, probably the time of monsters. And I think wonder is weak in the face of monstrosity, but there are, I think wonder does connect with change. And 10 years ago, I helped found a young person's charity called Action for Conservation. We were at 12, 17-year-olds, and when we had to work out our mission statement, we decided that a concatenation of terms that joined wonder and change was what we would want. So it goes wonder, hope, diversity in all its sense, action, change. So I believe there is a circuitry that is strong, that joins each of those on what is not a spectrum, but is a continuum. And so I believe that which begins in wonder can end in change, powerful change, but the links that join them can be weak, and they need reforging time and again. The work that Moth does, the work that the people in this book do, that I hope to celebrate and honor, they are reforging those links. And they taught me that despair is a luxury, and that hope is a discipline. And that is Tim Winton says optimism is a discipline. I think hope as a discipline is slightly different. Hope has one foot in the dream world, the imagining otherwise, which is what you do. You work in hard places, and then it has the other foot on the firm ground of need, of the labor that is required to change. And I just want to end by reading a paragraph in which César features to honor César, but it speaks absolutely, I think, to the conversation that we're having here. And it's actually, if you want to move on to the photograph where I'm randomly lying by a pool, this is where this conversation happened. You know, says César after a while, I work on lost causes, things that seem to be hopeless. Many of the cases I take on concern ecosystems that are extremely deteriorated, where peaceful people have been pushed violently out of the land. The situations I work in can be truly dire. So to be here in this forest by this river is for me to remember what land was once like and what land can be like again. The forest, the river, they are telling me that there is a lot left to fight for in ways I haven't felt for a long time. And to recognize the river's personhood in the vastest sense of that word is, I think, the beginnings of a basis for reciprocity. I want to bring my students here and show them how to imagine otherwise. I feel a flash of optimism. This place, saved both by law and by imagination, is part of a geography of hope. Maybe there's still a way out of this mess if people like César and Juliana are on the side of the rivers and the forests. Question mark. Thanks.
Thank you.
And just while César is looking at the question, I will just say this is the Los Cedros story, as Tom, others here know much better than me, is not a fairy tale ending. It's the ruling was consequential in its moment, also controversial in its moment, made so by the mining companies particularly, and it was the threats to the forest prowl the perimeter, ferocious and hungry, and as gold prices have soared to record highs following tariff wars and invasions, so the forest becomes more valuable, and the pressure grows. So it's an ongoing story, should we say?
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Give it up one more time, maybe. So we have a bunch of questions. We'll try to get through as many as possible. So the first one, what would you like the impact of the book to be?
The best phrase I've come up with for the movement that interests me is guardianship, and the book is dedicated as well to the rivers and their guardians. And I think guardian is a capacious and inclusive term for the many forms of action that many people can take on behalf of a living world that comprises humans as well as more than humans. And we've been talking a lot about people, but it's important to say, and this is one of the things that César has helped me understand as a human rights lawyer who is also a rights of nature lawyer, thinker, activist, is that we misunderstand the categories when we think of those as separate and siloed entities. And the UN in 2022, of course, added to its list of human rights the guarantee to a clean and the right to a clean and healthy environment. So I think I wish to fill the sails of guardians who are working for life, as I understand it, around the world, and maybe to make people laugh now and then, particularly when they discover what happened to me at the hands of Canada's black flies. Yeah.
So somebody from the audience asks, will the fact that a river is a connectivity, i.e. a gathering that seeks the sea, does that inhibit protecting it as a legal entity? In other words, is it too vast to protect by law?
Yeah, such a good question, and César will have some thoughts on it. I mean, we've just seen India close off the Indus to Pakistan, so the kind of weaponization of water boundaries. Rivers don't, on the whole, respect boundaries, though sometimes they have become boundary markers. So, but they are also, we discussed the complexity of defining a river. Is it its main flow? Is it the entirety of its watershed? And in one of the landmarks of the rights of nature movement, the 2017 Te Awa Whanganui River Claims Settlement Act, which is the parliamentary act that was passed in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that recognized the Whanganui as a spiritual and physical entity, as a rights-bearing entity, and as a legal person. It was the end of a very, very long, well, not the end, it was a significant marker in a very long and contested conversation over the meaning of the river between the iwi and the Crown, as it were, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Just recognized it as a river from the mountains to the sea, and so it had a much more holistic watershed understanding. And that, I think, one of the good outcomes of that act, well, one of the measurable outcomes of the act, has been a more holistic management policy, much more integrated, which recognizes a river as watershed and itself as having an aura that moves outwards from itself, as well as a gathering that feeds itself. So that's where a sort of vision, as it were, a cosmovision of what a river is, actually starts to manifest in legislation, regulation, and management. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, it was by reading your book that I realized that this unit of legal action, the watershed,
Yep.
made a lot of sense. And this is one of the reasons why about half of all court rulings on rights of nature have to do with rights of rivers. So rivers lend themselves to strategic legal action because they tend to protect a whole ecosystem, whole region. And that's what makes them also attractive as resources and as means of communication. Right now, we're working with Brazilian advocates who are very concerned about the environmental license to remove some obstacles to the full utilization of the Tocantins River as basically as a highway for the circulation of soybeans through the Cerrado region, right? So it's not just environmental activists who see the potential of a watershed, of a whole system of rivers and tributaries, but also, unfortunately, actors who see rivers as resources, waters as resources. And I would anticipate that in the future, there will be many more lawsuits being filed on behalf of and for the protection of rivers, like in the case of the Wanganui, although Wanganui was an act of parliament as opposed to a court ruling, but in Latin America, it's been mostly court rulings.
Trato.
Yeah, Trato, exactly, Magdalena, and so on.
Yeah, thanks. Great question.
Great. So as you beautifully laid out in your book, the rights of nature movement is gaining traction. What is an action or development in this movement that you're particularly excited about?
Well, Los Cedros, we've spent a lot of time on it, I think has been one of those gong strikes that really sounded around the world. Although it is broadly a performative in the sense of not having gubernatorial or legislative traction, the declaration by the Innu of Equanicht with respect to the Muteshikau-Shipu, the first river in Canada, Tassanan in this case, to have its rights declared, is a beautiful document. And I would commend people who are interested in this area. I'm sure many people actually know at least as much as I do about it in this room, but I think it's the Eco Jurisprudence Monitor, which is a really amazing website, which you can, an interactive global map, and that tracks all of the sort of earth justice minded initiatives. And actually, North America is roiling with them. It has 100 more than the US has 100 more initiatives tracked there than any other single nation. And then I would just speak for the Klamath River, which, as many people here will know, has just been the beneficiary of the biggest de-damming project in US history. And in 2019, the Yurok tribe, a salmon people who had been at the head of the alliance that brought this remarkable de-damming project to a head, issued a rights of the River Klamath declaration. And that became part, though by no means all, of the moral imaginative work of the Yurok and others that has led to this extraordinary, vast de-damming of this immense river, and then watching the life pour back into the watershed. So that's the Klamath is the beacon of hope for me at the moment. I don't know, César, what's lighting you up?
No, this is your book, Rob. I don't want to take too much time.
You're the lawyer.
They're gonna.
And you're César. So,
he's become a really good lawyer. We have these conversations on Zoom and on WhatsApp, and he's gotten very good.
On that note, on to the next.
Okay.
So as Pamela asks, as a visual artist who co-creates with nature beings, primarily trees, I am very curious as to how you collaborated with your co-authors, the Rivers. Could you speak about that co-creative process?
Yes, I can. I mean, I've always been interested in prepositions. So there's a vast difference between writing about, writing with, and being written by. And the of those is a ground I've inhabited, I think, for a long time, or painting with, creating with. Typically, when we objectify, we write about, we write on. But writing with is different in kind. And then being written by is different in kind again. And there are two. The book has two endings. I didn't expect either of them to happen, and after I'd finished the first, I certainly didn't expect the second to happen. It has no right to be there, but both of them were the intensest experience I've ever had of being written by, and in this case, a river, and then the spring. And so, perhaps it's the difference between Augustinian and Pelagian grace, if I can be theological for a moment, which is that for Augustine, the grace cannot be irritably sought. It just is given externally, and the Pelagian model is that one seeks and earns grace. And the two experiences that end the book are the closest I've ever come to knowing what given grace feels like, and I absolutely recognize the rivers as the givers there.
So I think we have time for a couple more questions. You mentioned the point at which language breaks. Can you talk about language being alive? Is it a gathering that seeks a sea?
It's a great question. I mentioned the shatter belt earlier, I think. There's all these beautiful astrophysical versions of this, the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud, and all of these places in space where matter is just shattered, but is kind of held in this suspension. I sometimes think of literature's, at least, relationship with water like that. We will never write water. We will never liquefy language into some simulacrum. I mean, the best we will get to is some simulacrum of water. But actually, I think it's when you abandon the impossible dream of correspondence between language and the world, the given world, that interesting things start to happen. So instead of continually finding yourself wanting for failing to find a poetics of water, a hydrological grammar that absolutely carries water in it and is flowed through, but give up on that, and instead metaphor, which is artifice at some level, like unlikeness, as Aristotle calls it, which is the best definition of metaphor I've ever come across. Metaphor suddenly becomes a form of artificial representation, and we recoil instinctively from that, because shouldn't it be natural, shouldn't it be true? But actually, no, this is where the interest happens, because we are linguistic creatures, and language is a mesh. So all of that is to say that actually the shatter belt is a beautiful place to me. It's not a place of language's failure. It's the inevitable consequence of the attempt to bring language into contact with that which is eventually ineffable, and a river is a powerfully ineffable presence. So I love the way language fails. I love the way language fails.
What is your practice of bringing your fieldwork and research that happens outside to the desk inside?
Very small notebooks. Into which I pour everything, including actual bits. I don't know if this is bad, that occasionally a leaf or a bit of mica or river sand or something. But then just fill with the language of César, the language of José Almonse or others, and they would just go in a kind of bunch of mosaic tiles. And then when I get home, there's a long period of kind of puzzle and piecework, and new tiles get added, and yeah, it's something I kind of understand now. I don't necessarily control it, but last thought, Vladimir Nabokov is probably the glitteriest writer I know. He says the true reader reads with his spine, not his brain. Her spine, not her brain. She waits for the telltale tingle down the backbone that tells that truth is being told, something like that. And I think because every hour spent reading is also an hour spent learning to write, I think I've kind of tuned my backbone to tingle when a sentence finally falls into place, or when a person or a river, something that is extraordinary. You kind of know, and that's where the notebook comes in, or the work is done on that sentence, and then it's a question of how many tingles make a book.
Excellent. So one final question before we transition to the book signing. So someone from the audience asks, there is, I think, a fifth watershed in your book, the epilogue. It too flows, you flow. Would you comment on that, please?
Okay, well, I won't, thank you. Yes, the epilogue is only a page and a half, and if you get there, I'd love you to get there having read everything that precedes it. That's those all the tributaries matter, but it's what completely surprised me, and it's my mum keeps reading it and then crying and then reading it and then crying again, and she got 5 times through that. I was like, Mum, you just don't read it again. It's fine, you've done it. But that is where the river has become time, and that's a beautiful observation from whoever asked that question. The fifth watershed, which is the watershed that lives in the dimension of time, and that's where the river, who is time, has flowed on beyond the limits of my life.
Great. Thank you.
That's so beautiful. I'm going to say that because I have read all the reviews. Maria Popova calls your book a portal of a book, which speaks to kind of, I imagine, not just the ending, but the whole book opening opening windows, opening doors into other stories, cases, movements, people, in really beautiful and generative ways. In many ways, to me, the book doesn't end with the last page, which is what the best books, both in a literary and a political sense, do. So really, Rob, thank you for all the work that went into this. Thanks for the friendship. Thanks for the fantastic contribution you're making to so many efforts that people have been building for so many years. And thanks for being such a good friend and such a fantastic collaborator and accomplice in crime.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again so much, Rob, and thank you all so much for being here. We're now going to move to the room across the hall where Rob will be kindly signing some books. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks everyone so much. Such warmth. Appreciate it very, very much.